Singapore's nightlife sector is among the hardest hit by the pandemic. Nightclubs, karaoke lounges and some bars have still not been allowed to reopen.
That's right, and there is also no indication on when they might be able to. Well, multimedia journalist Chow Suen pays a visit to two businesses to find out how they are surviving.
Remember those amazing nights out with your friends, filled with pounding music and sweaty bodies packed tightly together? This now feels like a thing of the past, especially with COVID-19 pandemic still firmly in our midst, and many nightclubs, such as this one here at Tanjong Pagar, unable to open even until today.
And those who can face strict regulations.
We have been closed since just before the circuit breaker, when the regulations that bars were mandated to close. We basically have been having close to zero revenue.
It's a bit concerning because we have staff overheads, rentals.
We went from about 300 people in a night
unable to open
about
even
to
until
basically
today.
not seeing
And
any
those
customers
who
at all.
can, with many
face strict
expecting to have to remain shuttered until
We
at
have
least
been
the middle of
closed.
next year. Nightclub establishments have had to find ways to pivot their businesses. For some, a change in concept was the solution, with many looking to go into the dining and food and beverage space.
We really pivoted in quite a few different ways. When we realized from the kind of government messaging that nightclubs really going to be one of the last kind of industries to open, we thought, why don't we try and change one of our existing concepts into a restaurant. Definitely you can't compare restaurant revenue to nightlife revenue, unfortunately. I think, coupled with the fact that you have to kind of finish alcohol sales at 10:30, which is obviously is quite tough. But all in all, I think, the main goal here is really to protect the livelihoods of the staff, right? And everything that we can make here basically goes back to paying back, make sure that these staff can keep being employed. If there's one thing this pandemic has happened, is really that you have to have different revenue streams as well that can kind of go through this time. So even when our club is closed in the future, we definitely want to have, different revenue streams. So one of the things we actually did was actually go into digital programming as well.
But not all have managed to adapt. From delivering cocktails to selling face masks, many have had to find other creative ways to keep the music alive.
I think for long term, I definitely feel that, clubbing is here to stay. I mean, just the social interaction, the amount of people that love to get together, you can't compare it to if you're looking at a kind of a live stream on a DJ. You need to be there.
While many businesses in Singapore are slowly opening up, it remains dark on the dance floor as many nightclubs stay closed and empty. But many of these nightlife players are doing all that they can to keep the drinks and their revenue flowing. It's hard to say when we will ever be able to dance in these spaces again.
Well, great stuff there, Suen. So, Haryanto, it's been a while since we've been able to go out and fully enjoy our nightlife in Singapore. Have you missed that? Having to, I guess, stop all your activities or your fun by like 10:30 p.m.
I think I have. I think nightlife is something that we all enjoy at this age, especially, right? I mean, when we talk about knocking off from work, we end work at about 6:30, 7. That is something that we look forward to kind of just unwind. But at the same time, also, I think with nightlife now capping at 10:30 p.m. that means I have an earlier sleep.
That's
right?
True. Which will serve, for the next day's work, of course.
Exactly.
Well, let's have a proper discussion about this with President of the Singapore Nightlife Business Association, Mr. Joseph Ong. Joseph, welcome to The Big Story. Maybe to the average person like Haryanto and myself, clubs and bars are simply avenues to unwind, hang out with friends, have fun. But looking at the bigger picture though, what does nightlife mean for the fabric of society, especially in a cosmopolitan city like Singapore?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me for this conversation, Haryanto and Ollie. And so on clubs and bars, they are definitely where people hang out and chill. But more importantly, it's also where acquaintances are made without the formality or planning that an office meeting or a restaurant meal requires. And in the past, we are talking about interactions of multiple like-minded people that are very diverse, people from the West and the South, mixing with the people from the East and the North. Every culture understands the concept of let's get a drink together. So I feel that this is what clubs and bars really actually means to a city like Singapore.
And beyond the social aspect of it, because you mentioned really the social aspect of it, let's talk about in economic terms. How much of a driver is nightlife for Singapore's economy?
Yeah, so this is the unique thing about the F&B sector that we know. It is well known that it is a sector that contributes very little to the GDP itself. It probably contributes about 1% overall. Clubs and bars are a fraction of that. But the F&B sector is a supporting function, and it supports 100% of where our GDP comes from, especially in areas like tourism. You will not actually ask, your HR function how much revenue they're contributing to the company, but you know that they are essential to keep the business going.
Well, Joseph, some of the clubs, like we saw at Zouk especially, that, they are pivoting to a more F&B slant. So, but at the same time, they are, some of the other clubs and bars, they are hitting some obstacles, especially when it comes to, getting all these necessary licenses to operate as an F&B business. So, on that note, should the authorities expedite the approval of these necessary licenses for these clubs and bars to pivot to F&B businesses?
There are multiple considerations. And I think the authorities know that they have to speed things up to help the various companies and employees in those companies. The agencies that I'm working with definitely are doing all that they can to try to expedite the pivoting of these businesses. But it is really a learning process for most of us at this moment. And sometimes we get through one agencies and then we have another agency that didn't understand what was done previously, and hence there are some delays. We are hoping to overcome all this as quickly as we can.
So Joseph, it goes without saying that nightlife scene is really affected due to this COVID-19 pandemic. On that note, Joseph, do you see Singapore's nightlife completely dying out? And what will it look like in the foreseeable future, say in 2021?
Well, I hope it won't die out. It'll be very sad if it dies out. No, my personal opinion is that even if there's no vaccine, many clubs and bars will just change the way they work, the way they handle customers, the way they do their business. So maybe intermingling among strangers will stop, and people who sits and drink with one another would now be people that and therefore traceable, not somebody that you just meet on the dance floor or bump into at the bar. Entertainment will also morph into something more maybe subdued, maybe a bit more distant. And these are all temporary measures. These are probably measures that will take place if there is really no vaccine and we are still required to keep our social distancing. But the moment there's some form of cure or vaccine, I am very sure we will then go back to life as we knew, where intermingling itself is actually very important amongst different people to form the acquaintances and to get a friendship going. So I think nightlife is going to be there. It's going to morph, but it will not die out.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Joseph. Fingers crossed, of course, for the best case scenario there. Thank you again for your time, and all the best to you and the members in your association. We've been speaking to Mr. Joseph Ong, President of the Singapore Nightlife Business Association.
In other local news, Apple is set to open its third store here. It'll be in the dome-like structure on the water of Marina Bay Sands that was previously occupied by mega nightclub Avalon, now making it the first Apple store in the world to sit on water. The tech giant didn't specify an opening date, only that it will open soon. An associate professor of marketing education at Singapore Management University said the new store will not likely generate excess demand, but Apple could use the COVID-19 crisis to negotiate a good rental, which aren't always available at premium locations like MBS.
There will be another Shake Shack outlet as well, with its fourth one at Suntec City Mall. Although an official opening date hasn't been announced, the hoardings were unveiled today, featuring murals by two Singaporean artists. Singaporean Henry Tan was fined $80,000 today after pleading guilty to two charges under the Securities and Futures Act. These for failing to disclose a multi-million-dollar transaction between his company and two other firms. Tan is the founder of Trek 2000, the company that invented the thumb drive.
The surge in unemployment and retrenchments as a result of the COVID-19 crisis has left many Singaporeans worried about their livelihoods. Now, between April and June, retrenchments more than doubled to 6,700 workers.
Job cuts are happening across sectors. Now, in recent weeks, European airline manufacturer Airbus let go of some of its workers in Singapore, and Singapore Press Holdings, which owns the Straits Times, announced it's laying off 140 staff from its media sales and magazines operations. Well, many readers have written to the Straits Times to find out about what happens if they are retrenched.
Burning questions, so let's bring in Assistant News Editor Toh Yong Chuan to take this further. Yong Chuan, hello. Yong Chuan, what are the most frequently asked questions that our readers have about retrenchment? What are the main concerns?
I would first say there are two broad groups of readers. One, those who are worried about whether they will be retrenched or not. And two, those who have already been retrenched or are being retrenched. So let's talk about the first group first. So for this group, of course, the biggest worry is whether can they hold on to their jobs. Now for this group, what I would recommend that they do is they should talk to their unions if they are unionized, or talk to their employers if they are not unionized. So keep the communications open, understand the business prospects, the business problems, and maybe work out with the employer some arrangements to cut costs so that they can continue working, maybe at lower pay, but at least they can keep their jobs and prevent themselves from being retrenched. So that's the first group. Now for the second group, those who have already been retrenched, I would broadly say that they have three what I would call broad rights. Now the first right is what I would describe as the right to be properly retrenched. Now under Singapore laws, retrenchment has a very strict definition. It means being made redundant, meaning the job is no more when a company restructures. Not all job losses are due to retrenchments, so that is a misconception. So sometimes there have been instances and reports of companies who try to avoid paying retrenchment benefits, so they disguise the retrenchment as something else, such as a dismissal. That is definitely not right, and the Manpower Ministry has spoken up against it. So, of course, the first right is this right to be properly retrenched and not to be subjected to things like disguised retrenchment or other forms of job losses. So that's the first right. Now, the second right is the right to be given enough or sufficient notice. Nobody likes to be told to pack up the next day, right? So under the Employment Act, there are some minimum stipulations by default. So for example, if you've worked more than 5 years, the minimum period of notice is 4 weeks. Of course, the employer can make a lump sum payment to the worker in lieu of that notice period. So that's the second right of being given the proper notice. And the third right is the most important one, the right to claim retrenchment benefit. So under the Employment Act, the law says that if you work for less than 2 years, you're not entitled. Less than 2 years, no entitlement. But if you are more than 2 years, then you're eligible and is subjected to, for example, whether your union has negotiated retrenchment benefits on your behalf with the employer, or whether it is stipulated in an employment contract. So these are the three rights: the right to be retrenched properly, the right to be informed, and for some workers, this whole issue of the entitlement or the eligibility of a retrenchment payout.
Now, Singapore does not have a legislated mandatory retrenchment benefit scheme, Yong Chuan. This means retrenched workers do not automatically get retrenchment benefits. What are the other misconceptions that people have about retrenchment?
So let me address the issue of whether payment of retrenchment benefit is mandatory or not. The short answer is no. So even though the Employment Act says less than 2 years, if you work, you are not entitled. It does not say that you are entitled even if you work for more than 2 years. The entitlement is to the extent of whether your employment contract or the union's collective agreement spells it out or not. Now, in those instances where it's spelled out, of course, you can go to the employer and say, this is the amount that I should be paid. Now, if it's not spelled out, really, then it really depends on the goodwill of the company as well as its financial ability. So, for example, even though it's not mandatory, the Manpower Ministry says it's customary for employers to make some form of payment. The payment can range from between 2 weeks to 1 month's salary for each year of service. But also, the ministry says it depends on the company's financial ability. And given the current recession and the problems that companies face, I think it's reasonable to expect that the company's ability to make retrenchment payments will be eroded given current economic conditions.
Well, thank you so much, Yong Chuan, for coming into the show. Very helpful advice there for people who are, worried about being retrenched or who have been retrenched. Yeah, we've been speaking to Assistant News Editor Toh Yong Chuan. You can read his story over at straitstimes.com.
Good evening, I'm Dylan Ang with a look at the global headlines. South Korea's capital, Seoul, has ordered the mandatory wearing of face masks in both indoor and outdoor public places for the first time. This as the country reported 266 new cases as of midnight on Sunday, a continuation of more than a week of triple-digit daily increases. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson called on parents to send their children back to school next month after the summer holidays, which he views will be a key step in helping the country recover from the coronavirus lockdown. He was following up on a warning over the weekend from medical advisors, who said that students face bigger risks from missing out on their education than from catching the virus. The US has authorized the emergency use of blood plasma from recovered COVID-19 patients as a treatment. The plasma is believed to contain powerful antibodies that can help fight off the disease. The New Zealand mosque shooter who killed 51 people last year faced his surviving victims and their families today at a sentencing hearing that is likely to see him be jailed for life. The 4-day hearing will hear statements from 66 survivors of the attack. The prosecution said Australian Brenton Tarrant spent years purchasing high-powered firearms, researched mosque layouts by flying a drone over his primary target, and timed his attacks to maximize casualties. Tarrant had previously pleaded guilty to 51 murder charges, 40 charges of attempted murder, and 1 charge of committing a terrorist act. In football, Bayern Munich were crowned European champions for the 6th time after beating Paris Saint-Germain 1-0. France international Kingsley Coman headed in the decisive goal in the 59th minute. The victory secures a second treble for the Germans, who are also the Bundesliga and German Cup winners. And those are the headlines around the world. It's back to you guys in the studio.
Hey, the Straits Times launched its first ever virtual run today, replacing the popular annual ST Run. Unlike traditional running events, the ST Virtual Run allows participants to run at their own pace in their own space.
Now, to mark ST's 175th anniversary, there will be 2 categories at this year's event, 17.5 kilometers, which participants have 10 days to complete, and 175 kilometers over 60 days. Entry fees start at $15. Registration closes at 11:59 p.m. on October 4th, so head to straitstimesrun.com to sign up. Now do take a screenshot of this as well for all the necessary details.
Be sure to tune in to the Straits Times' Facebook and YouTube platforms later tonight at 8 p.m. for President Halimah Yacob's address.
For more news and videos, of course, you can visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.